welcome back to my channel. For those who don't know me, my name is Katharine, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of April. These books will be in no particular order, so let me just get into this. I guess I'll start with series first. So I started reading the Anne of Green Gables series. I've read the first 4 books in the series. There are 8 total, I think, officially, but there is a 9th that she was in the middle of writing and she passed away before it was published. I'm, of course, talking about L.M. Montgomery, the author of the Anne of Green Gables series. And the first 4 books that I read in April were Anne of Green Gables, which is the first book. This is the second book that I read in the Anne of Green Gables series. It's Anne of Avonlea. And then I have Anne of the Island, which is the 3rd book in the series. And then the 4th book in the series is Anne of Windy Poplars. So the Anne of Green Gables, for those who don't know, is a story about this girl named Anne Shirley, and she is an orphan, and she goes to live at Green Gables with Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, who are brother and sister who live in the same house together. And that's what like the first book is about, Anne of Green Gables. And then the following books in the series basically follow her throughout her life. So of course, Anne of Avonlea follows Anne as she graduates from grade school and then becomes a teacher in the hometown that she grew up in. And then she then goes on in the 3rd book in Anne of the Island to go off to college because she wants to get her bachelor's degree. And then the 4th book, Anne of Windy Poplars, if I can speak English today, this is a book of her becoming a principal of a school in Windy Poplars. I can't wait to read the rest of the series. I gave Anne of Green Gables 5 stars as well as 5 stars to Anne of Avonlea. And then I gave 4 stars to Anne of the Island and another 4 stars to Anne of Windy Poplars. The next series that I actually finished, I was really excited to read The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. It's the 3rd book in the Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien. Instead of like starting a series like I did with Anne of Green Gables, I actually finished this series. I'm so excited because boy was I just not interested, and I was also a little confused by it. I am so glad that there are like synopses, I think it's synopses, at the beginning of each book so that you know what you're reading, because I was just, first of all, not interested, and I just felt really disconnected from the story and the characters, but I also was a bit confused as well. I just really could care less about really what was going on, and also just like with all the characters and the plot things that were going on, I'm like, what is even going on? Because it felt like they were doing nothing while also doing everything at the same time, if that even makes sense. I feel like they were doing a lot of little things that like kind of added up to like not a lot. I don't even know if I make sense, but it makes sense in my brain. But yeah, I finished this book, which rounds out the series for me, and that is The Return of the King, a part of the Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I gave it 3 stars. I would have given it 2 stars because 2 stars to me is like, even though I didn't enjoy it, like I could see why other people enjoy it. I definitely have discovered through reading the Lord of the Rings series that I am not a fantasy reader. I'm not even like a romantasy reader, which is kind of surprising because I've heard that romantasy is kind of like the in-between of like not going full-fledged like high fantasy while also like kind of being in the fantasy realm because it's like light and fluffy. I just have discovered that like I'm not romantasy or like high fantasy person. Maybe I would be interested in fantasy if it was like middle grade, because I do like Harry Potter, and Harry Potter is considered fantasy, but it's more like middle grade. So for like younger readers, so maybe that's just what my capacity is for reading fantasy. But yeah, I'm the reason why I would have given it 2 stars is because I could see other people liking it if they like high fantasy. But I gave it 3 stars, like I bumped it up a star, because the only reason or the redeeming quality of this whole series is the fact that I love the descriptions of like the scenery and of like what they're eating or what they're looking at or where they are. So I definitely liked the vibes. That's why I bumped it up the star, is because of the vibes. So would initially give it 2 stars, but bumped it up to 3 stars because of vibes, okay? Don't judge me. And then going on to standalones, I read this book by Fredrik Backman. It's called A Man Called Uva. I think that's how you pronounce it. I listened to the audiobook of this, and that's how they pronounce the name. At first I thought it was Ove or something like that, but the way that they pronounced it in the audiobook was Uva. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's Swedish. Fredrik Backman is a Swedish author, and A Man Named Uva is taking place in Sweden. So I really like this. This is considered like, I think, like a literary fiction book. It basically just follows the day-to-day life of this man called Uva, as the title clearly states. And it just really is a beautiful story of like just seeing the beauty in every day. I gave it 3 stars. I initially was gonna give it 4 stars, but upon rethinking it over the past few weeks, I think I'm gonna give it 3 stars, just because like it does deal with like a lot of like heavy topics. Please check trigger warnings for this, because like I definitely didn't expect some things to be in this book that were actually in this book. Even though it did portray a lot of like really like great lessons and sentiments of like, you know, having a positive outlook on life, even though you've been through really hard things, it just hit home for me a lot of the time, because the triggers in it hit home for me because I've dealt with those types of things before. So it's just, it was kind of hard hitting and kind of made me feel a little bit down and depressed reading it. So even though it did have great messaging, it just made me be in a mood that made me really sad. So I also think it was a kind of a situation that I was going through in my personal life, like while I was actually reading this. So like, I think that's why I bumped it down to a 3 star from a 4 star. I initially, like I mentioned, was gonna give it a 4 star, but I think I'm gonna give it a 3 star instead. And then this book, my favorite book of the month, possibly a contender for my favorite book of the year. It is an Amy Harmon book, What the Wind Knows. And for those who don't know, my favorite book of last year was an Amy Harmon book, and that book is called Where the Lost Wander. And Amy Harmon hit it out of the park once again. I was really skeptical, like up until like the 75% mark of this book, because like it did come off as like really slow. And for those who don't know, this book is essentially a time travel story. It takes place in 2001 and then also in 1921, and it's like an 80-year gap. So this girl, she's an author, and her grandfather is from Ireland, and she grew up like basically raised by her grandfather, and he teaches her a lot about like Irish culture and like her Irish heritage, because he was from Ireland but moved to New York City when he was like going off to college. And that's why she lives in New York City now, is because when her grandfather moved from Ireland to New York City, that's kind of like where he built his family, hence why his granddaughter now lives in New York City. So starts off in New York City 2001 with the grandfather and her going and talking about like the Irish culture and their Irish heritage. Like he basically raised her because her parents died when she was young, and then he unfortunately passes away. This is not a spoiler, by the way, like this is literally in the synopsis. And it's within the first like chapter or two of the book. So like it's not a spoiler, it's just like a part of the story. And then she basically like goes back to Ireland to like spread his ashes in this lake because like that was his last dying wish, is that he would go back to Ireland via her, the granddaughter, spreading his ashes in this particular lake. And then this crazy thing happens where she's transported back in time on this lake to the year 1921 from 2001. And it just takes off from there. There's a romance. You learn about like Irish heritage and Irish culture and Irish politics and history, because during the time of 1921, I did not know this, but there was a lot of uprisings of the Irish against the English. And that's part of the reason why I was kind of iffy about it, like 75% of the way in, because like I personally don't know a lot about Irish history. Not that I'm not interested in Irish history, because I really am, but I just don't know a lot because of the fact that like we aren't taught a lot about Irish history in American schools. We're taught, of course, a lot about American history in schools, but when it comes to like learning about world history, we don't know, or we aren't taught in American schools, at least when I was in school, about Irish history. We learn about like a lot of like English history, like British history, like collective British history, but like not to the extent of like American history, if that makes sense. So like this book does include a lot of Irish history, so I was just a bit confused about what was going on. But like honestly, like if I learned a little bit more outside of this book about Irish history and went back and like read this book, I feel like I would appreciate like the beginning parts of this book a lot more when they're describing, or when Amy is describing the politics and like the history of what's going on in 1921 in Ireland. So I was gonna initially give this a 4 stars, but like because of the reason of like the politics and history that I just wasn't understanding, and the last 25% really bumped it up for me, so I ended up giving this 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I honestly want to learn more about Irish history because I am a little bit Irish, if I'm being honest with you guys. I am mostly Scottish. For those who don't know, I'm mostly Scottish and Finnish, but of course, like Great Britain in general, like so England, Scotland, and Ireland is like a collection of islands all very close to each other. So of course, like if you're Scottish, you're bound to be a little bit English, or you're bound to be a little bit Irish. So I do have a little bit Irish in me. So I would love to learn more about Ireland and Irish history, and then like go back and read this book, because I feel like I would appreciate this book so much more. And if I read this again after learning about Irish history, then I might bump this up to a 6 star. But it is standing at a 5 star right now. Still amazing, still a contender for like one of the best books of the year for me. And we'll see what the rest of the year holds, if this still stands at being like one of the best books that I've read this year. And we'll just see what happens, but definitely go read this book. I can't wait to read more Amy Harmon books. I can't recommend her enough. She is definitely in the running for one of my all-time favorite authors. I think I'm gonna try to read at least one more book by her to see if I like that, and then if I read like 3 or more of her books that I absolutely love, then I'm gonna tell everyone I know that she's one of my favorite authors of all time. I like to do that. That's kind of like my like rule for myself, is I have to read at least 3 of the author's books and rate them like 5 stars in order for me to consider them my favorite author of all time, or one of my favorite authors of all time. But anyway, that's this book. Thank you for listening to my rant on this, because this was great. So on to like the nonfiction books that I read this month. The first one I want to talk about is by John Piper, called Don't Waste Your Life. I was really disappointed about this book. I initially was going to give it 3 stars, but I think I'm going to bump it down to 2 stars because of the fact that even though I consider myself a Reformed Christian, and John Piper I think is considered a Reformed Christian as well, but I found this book to be very like legalistic and very distant and cold, if that even makes sense. And that's why I'm like really hesitant about even calling myself a Reformed Christian, because Reformed Christians tend to get the bad reputation or have negative connotations of being distant and cold and very legalistic, even though I definitely admire and believe and affirm a lot of the sentiments in Reformed Christianity. You can sometimes get down this rabbit hole of being a Reformed Christian where you are very fundamentalist, which I do understand that and I totally agree with. Like, yes, should we focus on the Bible and what does the Bible say? Yes. Should we focus on Christ and how to best glorify him? Yes. But we can sometimes, as like Reformed Christians, like go down this rabbit hole, like I was saying, of like getting too much into like the nitty-gritty of it, that we become desensitized or insensitive to like what other people are going through, and almost like unleashing a war against like us versus them, like us being like Christians and them being like anyone who doesn't believe the same exact way as we do, instead of like acting out of love and, you know, compassion for other people. Yes, should we stand by Christ and should we see what the Bible says about things and should we do everything to glorify Christ? Yes. But should we degrade someone or belittle someone just because they don't believe the same thing that we do? Or should we look down on people just because, well, they're living in sin, or that's not right? Like, that's not how we should be looking at people, because we were once there. We were sinners and we were once there in their spot. And I still sin as a Christian. Like, just because I've become a Christian doesn't mean I stop sinning. Do you know what I mean? It's not until I'm in heaven that I'll be glorified like Christ. So this book, even though I did agree with like a lot of the things that John Piper said in this, it basically, the book itself is about not wasting your life, as the title says, and how we can best glorify Christ in our everyday lives, if that makes sense, and not wasting your life just doing like lukewarm stuff like a lot of Christians do in America specifically. But we shouldn't be comfortable in our sin and comfortable in just being religious, but really having like a full relationship with Christ. But the things he would sometimes say in this, like, I'm like, in one moment, in one sentence, I would be like, yes, I agree, amen. But then in other aspects, like in the next sentence, it would be like one sentence he would be saying like something that I'm like, yes, that's awesome. And then in the very next sentence, he would be saying something that I'm like, okay, that was super insensitive and cold. Like, why would you say that? It just seemed like very like hit or miss for me, like the things that he would say. So that's why I'm giving it 2 stars. Like, the only reason why I'm giving it 2 stars is because I like agreed with some of the stuff, but for the most part it came off as like just very legalistic and distant and cold and insensitive. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for those who like John Piper. I thought I was really gonna like this book too. It was actually given to me as a birthday gift, but I'm gonna be unhauling this, unfortunately. And the next 2 books that I have are actually non-fictions as well, but I don't have physical copies of them, but I'll be popping the covers of these books right next to me right here. The first one is Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I gave this 3 stars because even though, much like Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper, even though I did agree with a lot of the things that were in the Mere Christianity book by C.S. Lewis, I just felt like it was very dry. There wasn't anything in particular that I disagreed with, much like in Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper. There were things in Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper that I actually disagreed with, but in Mere Christianity, there wasn't really anything like that I necessarily disagreed with. Everything I agreed with, but like it was just kind of dry to me. It wasn't very like colorful, if that makes sense. Like it didn't have a lot of things that I took out of it, if that makes sense. And when I rate Christian living books, I tend to rate them on how much I take out of them. But that's just kind of my thoughts on Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Even though it was an okay book, like I thought a lot of the things in there that he had were great, I just felt like it was very dry. And then the last book, that's a nonfiction that I read this month, and just like overall, the last book that I read this month was Freedom, My Book of First by Jaycee Dugard. This is the second book that she has written. I did not rate this book. I read A Stolen Life by her last month in March, and I gave that no rating as well, just because for memoirs where people are actually writing a story about their own experiences in their own life, I don't feel right rating their experience. So I didn't give that one a rating. But basically, the first book, A Stolen Life, is about her, Jaycee Dugard, who she was literally kidnapped and held captive for 18 years, and she gave birth to two daughters when she was in captivity, being kidnapped by this really horrible man and wife. And that was the first book. And then the second book, which I read this month, Freedom, My Book of First, is basically her book of first. It's basically her life after being released from captivity, and like basically just explaining what she's done after the fact of like being, you know, rescued out of that horrible situation. But yeah, it was pretty good. I liked it. I liked hearing about her redemption and like how she's continuing to move on in life and still keep a positive attitude despite all of the horrible, tragic, horrific things that she went through. I almost forgot, because last month I forgot to add this book onto my March reading wrap-up. And in March, I read the book Voyager by Diana Gabaldon, which is the third book in the Outlander series. And I ended up giving that book 3 stars. I am officially DNFing or not finishing the Outlander series because of the fact that I've had too many misses with this book series in general. It's just not enjoyable. I almost forgot to put this at the end of this April reading wrap-up, so that's why I'm coming on here right now, because I totally forgot to put it in my March reading wrap-up. So here I am. I'm sorry for this chaotic clip, but I thought I would just mention it because I forgot to mention it last month. And I just thought I'd let you know that I read that because of the fact that I forgot to mention it last month. But that's my little update for that. But yes, thank you for watching. But those are all of the books that I read this month. Thank you so much for following along. Let me know if you read any of these books or you want to read any of these books down in the comments below. Do all the YouTube things that you know how to do. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!